Jamie, let's start with your question actually, because that was on my kind of mailbag list. So best client targets for the data agency model. I think the key is there has to be enough. There's kind of a two-pronged fit with, it really depends on the types of data that they have, right? So if they have any type of complexity in their data, right? If they are running ads, they'll obviously have ads data. If they, I'm assuming we're talking all about like online businesses, right? If you're not doing something online, you just have less data that's interesting here. So if you have ads and analytics data, and if you also have sales data of any granularity, I think that's where it gets interesting. What I found is this works really well, right, with like e-commerce shops, with SaaS businesses, right, which have nuances around subscriptions. This works well with B2B businesses, believe it or not, where they really struggle so there's a divide, right, between your analytics and your ads and stuff that's happening online, and then like real sales of what's happening in your shop, what's happening with all of your leads, what's happening with your SaaS subscribers, right? So that's the kind of fundamental work that we do in data land, and why we have jobs, right, is we connect those dots. We're kind of the glue between your online world and your ads and all that stuff and your like real business and sales. Not that those two are, they're both real, right, but real in different ways. So that's the kind of fundamental thing that I look for, and I'm thinking about like a target business is, can you bridge that divide, right? And because that's the challenge that every one of these businesses has, right? They have stuff going on online and they have sales, and they're like, there's all kinds of questions to answer about how those two intersect. For example, if you want to segment your buyers, right? So you have an e-commerce shop, and you can segment your buyers by, these are new buyers, these are returning buyers, these are kind of like whale, really high performing buyers. But if you don't know what marketing channels drove those buyers and kind of like what campaigns brought them, you're kind of not able to connect those dots, right? So that's a really common one that we'll build out with e-commerce shops to bridge that divide. And so there's another question that came up. I forgot who asked this. Let me look at the notes. I think this was, I think this might be, yeah, Jamie, I think this actually might have been some thoughts I had about your question. It's the kind of key is cracking that CRM or sales divide. So if you're providing currently like just marketing analysis, so reporting on kind of stuff that you're doing, and you want to broaden out your data service to cover the rest of the business, that's the kind of key, is can you crack that CRM or sales tracking, or like e-commerce shop, like can you crack into helping them analyze their sales data? Because then you're like working holistically across the business, and you're not just focusing on web analytics and kind of ads reporting. Jamie, hope that answers your question. Ping me in chat if it doesn't. Okay, so let's go back to Eddie's pricing question. How do we oh, Jamie, by the way, in the course there's a data pipeline spec that gets into examples of all of these analyses, right? From what we do with SaaS businesses, what we do with e-commerce shops, what we do with digital agencies. And I think looking through that list could help kind of spark some thoughts. So yeah, if you drop me a DM, I can share you a link to that example spec. So Eddie's question about pricing, like how do we price these services? So we've kind of had an evolution on that, and I kind of get into that in the course as well. When I started CIFL, I was traveling a lot. I was in the mountains a lot. I wanted to take long stretches of time off from working at a time. So I liked pricing things as project based, because I didn't have any, like long-term daily commitments. So we'd just do project-based builds, right? We'd scope out what we wanted to do, say it would cost, 5 or 10K, whatever it is. A lot of this, we're still doing Google Sheets templates too, so smaller projects. And then we'd build it and we'd be done, right? Then once I kind of got off the road and decided to be actually build a real business around this stuff, moved to doing retainer based. So we built the agency data pipeline service that was a retainer based commitment, because with agencies, the idea they need a fair bit of maintenance, right? Because they're always adding new clients, adding new platforms that they work on, changing the work, right? They're very dynamic. So retainer based, I found worked well with agencies, because they're so dynamic, but it left a lot of money on the table, because retainers are not a good service necessarily. You might be able to make them work. I found that they weren't, the way that we did things wasn't a great fit for retainers for individual businesses, for e-commerce shops, for SaaS businesses who have maybe more like in-house people who want to maintain the stuff that you're building, and it's really about like getting a kickstart, right? So getting a data pipeline built, and then maybe they'll maintain it, or they'll need a little bit of help maintaining it, but they won't need like a 3 or 6 or 12-month commitment to be their data team effectively. So yeah, once I saw that we were just leaving money on the table, right? There were deals that were coming in that we could have easily won and serviced if we just offered a sprint model instead of a retainer model, right? So pay for what you build. Then we decided to switch completely to the sprint model, and that's what we do now, which is and this is really handy because it gives you a single price point for everything that you do, and instead of you can time box your service and your commitment, right? So we structure sprints as 3 weeks, and generally that's 1 week for setting up data feeds, 1 week for setting up data models, 1 week for reporting. And those are the 3 elements of a kind of data pipeline sprint, I would say. And the reason that we did that is because we could just say what's reasonable and what's not reasonable to do in 3 weeks. So if a client has a bunch of stuff that they'd like to do, you can kind of take that and synthesize it. Okay, here's what we do in sprint 1. And this is what we talk about in the course about like the road mapping exercise, right? It's breaking down a whole host of things that we could do into tangible. We could do this in sprint 1. This would be sprint 2. This would be sprint 3. This would be sprint 4, right? Breaking them into 3-week chunks. The reason I find that that's really helpful, both for us and for the client, is that it's extremely clear what they're paying for. They know that they're paying 5K for this. So our base sprint price is 5K. That'll probably go up a little bit, right? It's been that way for a long time. But you can just raise your sprint price on new clients, right, as they come in, and kind of raise your pricing that way if you want to. The advantage is the client is getting what they pay for, right? They're doing a sprint, they're getting a very specific deliverable, specific executable from your work, right? It's not like they're on retainer and it's kind of like nebulous what you're doing every month. So they get what they pay for. And that's really nice because as a service provider, right, you can be very clear with here's what you're getting, here's what you're paying for. And also as a service provider, you know what your costs are in terms of labor to deliver a sprint. So generally we'll try to keep margins, like gross margins on sprints between around like the 60-65% range, right? So we'll kind of bucket that 35-40% for labor and other costs to execute a sprint. And for a service delivery model, that's pretty high margin. So yeah, we really like sprints for that reason, because it makes it very easy for us to plan ahead, right? Like we know that we have this sprint or this sprint coming up. We know who we can staff on those sprints, right, in advance, and it kind of gets you out of the reactive culture, which is really what sinks data efforts a lot. Is just doing, you know, letting like any email that comes in kind of be your assignment editor for like what you're going to build in a data pipeline. That doesn't really work well, because this stuff takes planning and time, right, to do well. Testing, documentation, these are things that are not well done in a reactive way. So using the sprint model lets us really be like deliberate about how we do that, versus in retainer, where you get more reactive. You feel like, oh, you're on retainer, you have to respond to everything that's coming in, or you have to prioritize whatever seems highest priority at the time. But it's like, no, when you do a sprint, you prioritize the sprint, and then the fun part kind of is afterwards. Once you're done building, then we generally structure what we call like support or maintenance retainers, which are lower than like a build retainer, right? Because you're not actively doing, if you want to build something, you do a sprint, right? But if they just want help answering questions, if they want help making small changes to reports or to the data models, then we kind of get into support mode, where we say, for, I don't know, about 2K a month, might be more, might be less, depending on complexity of their pipeline and what their kind of demands are. But for that smaller retainer, like, we'll just be there to help them, right? And that's really great, I think, on both sides, because they're paying for dedicated support and help. Therefore, we are obliged to, when they come to us with questions or little things, it's not costing us something, it's a service we're providing. So that's been really good for aligning interests, right? If you don't charge for support or bake that into your pricing model in some way, you'll just, in working in data, like, you'll just be annoyed when people come to you with questions or modifications. It's like, no, just structure, that's going to come, right? So structure it into your offering, and yeah, get paid for it, because you know that you're going to eat that cost regardless, on the back end. Okay. Any other questions from folks on here? If not, I have a couple other things that I could get into from the mailbag. Let me just look in there. Okay, Martin had a good question. This was, do you only acquire leads via inbound content marketing, or do you have any other channels as well? Short answer to that is, obviously organic is probably the main channel, right? Organic YouTube, and then organic search. That's probably, if you're watching this, I'm guessing that's like how you kind of found CIFL. And that works really well, because people are looking for something specific. They find you, you're kind of answering the question. Oh yeah, hey Martin. So organic is great, and like, organic is always the number one channel for this type of work, because it gives you some like baked in credibility, right? Like, if Google thinks you're credible to answer a given question, whether it's in YouTube search or a Google search, then yeah, like, it's probably true that you do have some credibility, right? You're probably linked to from multiple people, and yeah, so you have some authority, like, by nature of being on the internet and ranking well, like, you do have some authority, because a lot of these search terms are relatively competitive. But we do also run ads. I wouldn't, at this point, to get consistent reach, we run ads. Well, let me reframe that. We run ads as kind of like a follow-up, right? So if you're getting organic traffic, it really helps. Like, they probably come in and they're looking for one thing specifically, right? They might be looking for like a Google Sheets query tutorial or a BigQuery SQL tutorial. But yeah, you have a tutorial that offers that. They'll come find it. They'll think it's helpful. Maybe they'll share it, whatever it is. But you're trying to sell services here, right? Or you might be trying to sell courses or something like that. And the person who's coming in while they're at work and they're searching and they're like just getting the info that they need to do their job, and then they're probably going on with their day, right? They're not spending the rest of their day, or probably not, just like looking through all the other stuff on your site, right? To see the services that you offer, the courses that you offer, the other blog posts you have, you know, like getting into your whole universe. That isn't going to happen like day one. So the way that we use paid traffic is to have those kind of follow-ups, right? So sorry, let me close the chat whenever. So over the course of time, we'll basically run retargeting ads on Facebook, on YouTube, that kind of follow up with people who came to the site, right? So you've probably seen this, right? If you go to CIFL and you'll just get followed around with retargeting ads. That's of course on purpose. We want to make sure that people who are coming to the site are aware of all the other stuff that we're doing, because if you're coming to CIFL, right, there's a high likelihood that you are interested in this other stuff, right? Or at least you may be at some point. So I wouldn't view channels like that in a vacuum, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's what's been helpful for us. What we haven't really done much of, you know, there are tactics like posting in forums, and, you know, forum posting used to be a big thing. You know, kind of posting in like different interest Slack groups used to be a big thing. Sorry, I'm trying to move out of the sun here a little bit. We don't really do much of that, much like active outbound at all. I will say that the one thing that I used to do a lot of that was really helpful, if you're starting out, is guest posting. So I met Ryan when we put together a guest post for his blog, Ryan Stewart, my partner now. And I kind of did a flurry when I started CIFL. I did a flurry of guest posts on different people's blogs. I think that was probably like looking back on it, the best thing that I did to get set up initially, because doing all of those guest posts, let me move really out of the sun here. Doing all those guest posts allowed me to form relationships with a bunch of people I otherwise would have never met, right? Kind of subscribe to their newsletter, reach out, say like, hey, I'm thinking about working on this. Do you want to publish something together? So that's the one thing I would recommend if you're getting started. Guest posts, kind of make relationships with other people in the space. And that can be a really effective kind of kickstart to your like organic rankings for your services and stuff like that. Martin, I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you have any follow-ups. Hector, hey Hector. So Hector's question, how do you identify the best fit for purpose between setting up a backend pipeline, you know, BigQuery, Data Studio, Google Analytics, for setting up an analytics solution, integrating tools in a stack? So Segment, Mixpanel, AppsFlyer, etc. You know, that's a good question, Hector. I think I always think so let's focus on like Segment specifically. You know, we work with a handful of businesses that use Segment, right? Most SaaS businesses at this point will have Segment implemented for event tracking. Segment's a little weird because you could also integrate Segment with like Intercom, right? Or other, you know, kind of like more event tracking tools. Let's focus on Segment though. Segment, I think, is a complement. I would think of Segment as like one data source amongst a data pipeline, right? So Segment is really for event tracking. Same with Mixpanel, really. It's about event tracking, and same with any of these tools, right? They're a data source from an app. And then the pipeline is for analysis of those data sources. So that's basically how we use it, right? It's like you'll always want to have Segment or Mixpanel if you have an app, right? You want to have one of those for event tracking. Maybe you have some like event-based notifications that go on there. Maybe you have some like kind of customer management, right, that happens there. CDP, I guess, customer data portal or platform, I guess they call these things. Analysis is different, right? So analysis uses the data from those sources, like from Segment into BigQuery. They do that natively, right? And then you'll perform some analysis based on that data. So I would say they're very complementary, and often Segment will be one of the key sources that you'll use to analyze, analyze data from apps. And yeah, does that answer? I hope that answered your question, Hector. I think it does. Okay, cool. Let me see check the Q&A window here. Alrighty, Martin. So there's a handy Q&A feature. Thank you for using it, Martin. Never used this before. So how do you balance / segment between those interested in courses, teaching data analysis, and done for you agency services? Got it. Yeah, so this is something I think about a lot. So the question is basically, you have you have people coming into your site, right? You're talking about a subject. Say you're talking about like BigQuery SQL, and some of your audience might be interested in a course, right? And like how to do this thing. And some of your audience might be interested in a service. Can this thing be done for me? And the way that I think about that is that they're completely different audiences. The people who have budget to hire you for services generally don't have time to learn how to do it themselves. So what I found is that there's almost no overlap, very minimal overlap between a course student and like a service customer. It actually, so short answer to your question, how do you call out to those audiences? Generally, we'll have a blog post, right, about a specific subject, and then the calls to action will be kind of split. So it's like, want to learn more about this yourself? Here's a course. Want help? Want this done for you? Here's a link to service page, right? So you can have the same content with two forks, and they'll know, like your audience will know which fork they're in, right? If they have budget but not time, they want it done for them. If they have a little bit of budget but maybe more time and not a full budget, right? They might want to do it themselves. So I think they're really different customers, and you can just make people aware of the different options there. The interesting thing about this is that there is crossover between those two. So it's not uncommon that specifically with like the Build Your Agency Data Pipeline course, which was more aimed at agencies building their own data pipeline, right? There would be course students, people who picked up that course, who then got into it, learned about the process, right? And they just said, man, this is too, I don't have time. They realized that they had time to kind of skim the course and go and learn about the concepts, but they didn't have time to get the first implementation going. So that's been a bunch of projects that we've done, is doing implementations of pipelines for people who took the course and then wanted to move into services because they wanted kind of help getting off the ground. So short answer is generally they're different audiences, but there is some crossover there, and generally don't be afraid of like cannibalizing your own audience. People are smart, and they'll figure out what works for them and what they need. Okay, thank you for using the actual Q&A box, Martin. And No, no apologies necessary, Martin. That's a good question. I think, let me dig into the mailbag here. Unless anyone else has questions on here, I think that's really all that I had in the mailbag. Martin's question here, got to Jamie's question, paid versus organic. We talked about pricing. Oh, Eddie had a question here on, are there any prerequisites for the course? That is a great question, something I hadn't thought about too much. I'd recommend that you have some familiarity with the stack already, right? So some familiarity with BigQuery, with Sheets, with Data Studio. You don't have to be an expert in them because a key part of the course, right, is talking about how to hire for experts in these roles, right? So you yourself as a business owner don't need to be an expert. You just need to have fluency about how these tools are used, how the stack fits together, and just like understand in general, like the big picture of how these things are useful. And I think crucially, if you're going to be pitching these services to clients, right, you need to understand how the service fits into kind of what's the context for how you'll offer this service, right? If you're doing, say you're doing marketing services right now, running ads on Facebook and Google, and you're kind of like doing some data stuff to report on them, well, then it's really the prerequisite is like, is there more interest in doing data analysis from your customers, right? That you'd want to get into this stuff. And you can speculate about that, right? But you have to have some type of, I'd recommend having some type of thesis for yourself about what you want to get out of this course on, and generally diving deeper into building your data agency practice or data consulting practice, right? So that's really the prerequisite for me is, do you understand kind of the stack and the pieces and have confidence that if you don't know something or don't have time to become an expert, that you'll be able to go out and hire for those roles, right? Which generally answer is yes, right? It's very straightforward to find the types of folks, the roles that we hire for, at least as part of our program. But yeah, the main prerequisite would just be like, why do you want to grow your data agency practice, right? Like without some thesis or concept about, oh, I think I could serve these existing clients in this new way, or I think I have this domain expertise and I think I could really serve this like niche in a specific way. Yeah, I'd start there of like just a business thesis about why you could offer this service, and kind of covering the basis of like confidence that the tech, you can pick up the technical topics. Martin, yeah, this is a good question. So are you open to mentor/coaching sessions? You know, this is something I've been thinking a lot about as part of building this course, right? I do have interest in building kind of like a community of practice around building data agencies, specifically around this model, right, of building data pipelines and sprints and this whole thing. So short answer is yes. I'm curious what your thoughts would be, Martin, and other people's thoughts around what kind of structure that would take, whether that would be, you know, kind of like a group of us going through things, having like weekly calls or something like that, you know, or kind of what would be most helpful to people. So yeah, I'm definitely open to structuring that. I enjoy obviously doing this type of stuff and kind of passing on what I've learned about this business through experience. So yeah, happy to explore that. I think we should, let's chat about that in the business of data Slack channel, and yeah, see where that goes. Yeah, thanks, Martin. Okay, question from Hector. Hey, Hector, how much different would a pipeline setup be if you were able to swap BigQuery for Redshift or Snowflake? Oh, sorry, I marked it as done, but it's not. So short answer, Snowflake and BigQuery at this point, there's some nuances to each of them, but I think you could basically swap those out. They're more or less equivalent. What I would not do is ever use Redshift. I don't use Redshift. We don't use Redshift on the team, but I know plenty of data people who are forced to use Redshift because their company has it or whatever it is, and it's just an absolute like bear to work with. So I think if someone is on Redshift and is asking you to set up a pipeline, like yeah, you could probably do it. I personally would avoid it. And I can't even tell you why because I don't use it. I've just been like scared off of using Redshift by too many people complaining about it. And yeah, hope that answers your question, Hector. I think it does. It's basically a short answer. But go with BigQuery or Snowflake. With DBT, the important thing is, thank you, Hector. So the important thing is DBT allows you to abstract. It's the abstraction layer that allows you to work with multiple databases using the same kind of like SQL code. So you can write DBT models and then basically deploy them to BigQuery or Snowflake without too much modification. Cool. Thanks, Jamie, for your note. And cool. I think the mailbag, let me just double check that nothing else came in. Oh, Eddie had another question. Thank you, Eddie, about does the data agency course include the other paid courses? So Data Studio, Google Sheets Query, Lazy Tool Belt. Short answer is it includes the Data Studio course. It also includes, obviously, the BigQuery course is free. The Data Studio course is the paid course that's most relevant to this. The other paid courses on CIFL are really focused on like Google Sheets and like building Google Sheets tools. So I'd be happy to give them if you pick up this course, the Build Your Data Agency course. I'd be happy to give them to you, but I frankly don't think that they're really what you need to execute this service, right? They're kind of not that related and more about like spreadsheet hacking. So the Data Studio course is included in this because that if you or your team are new to Data Studio, that can be a really helpful one to kind of get off the ground in that way. Cool. I think the mailbag is depleted. Any last? First of all, thanks to all of you who joined and asked questions. It's a lot of fun. I look forward to doing some more of these like more live sessions. And yeah, and I'll drop the course is still at the old. By the way, if you purchased the course before when it was the agency data pipeline course, you'll still have access to it. The course, if you want to dive deeper, is learn.codings4losers.com/agency-data-pipeline. Any other questions from any of you folks on here before we go? Thanks again for joining and making this a lively session. It was a nice way for me to start the morning at least. All right, cool. I'm going to sign off then. Thanks to all of you who joined. There will be a replay of this up on YouTube, hopefully sometime later today. And yeah, talk to all of you soon, and I will see you in Slack. Take care.